Hello, I'm Daniel Prista, student of the Master Degrees program in Biosystems Engineering at the Federal Fluminense University, and I'm here to talk about my work with Professor João Carlos Soares de Mello about the evaluation of waste disposal facilities in Rio de Janeiro using the MACBETH multi-criteria decision aids. So the objective of this work is to evaluate the four main waste disposal facilities used in the urban area of Rio de Janeiro since the beginning of the 20th century, using the MACBETH multi-criteria decision aid method as a tool to evaluate the environmental performance of those sites. Talking about the history of waste problems in Rio de Janeiro, there was no collection of waste in the city at all until the 19th century. And the first disposal site was just a waste dump in the Sapucaia Islands, opened 1865. And there was no treatment or regard with the water contamination by the waste. In 1940, a landfill was built in the district of Caju, but even there was no treatment or remediation of the impacts. In the 1970s, environmental concern raised in the whole world, and it put pressure on governments for better solutions for environmental problems in the cities. In Rio de Janeiro, two controlled landfills were built around that time with better treatment of the waste. Those were the Gramacho landfill, opened in 1976. It became the biggest landfill in Latin America, and Jericinó, opened in 1986. Despite the evolution, uh, there were still problems with the waste disposal facilities, and all the sites had major problems and caused environmental impacts in the region. One of the biggest problems of the Gramacho landfill was that it was too close to the Galeão airport, the Rio de Janeiro International Airport, and that attracted birds that could collide with the aircrafts. So in 2011, so in the 21st century already, the Seropédica landfill was built, solving many of the problems that the predecessor had. So multi-criteria decision aid methodologies are a set of techniques that can help a decision maker to evaluate alternatives with sometimes even conflicting criterion in an objective way. It developed intensely after the 1970s and can be used in various fields, including the environmental sciences. One of the main phases of the process of multi-criteria decision aid is the structuring phase. In this phase, in this particular work, we defined the alternatives, that was the Caju, Gramacho, Jericinó, and Seropédica landfills, and the criteria used to evaluate them. That's the distance to permanent protection areas according to Brazilian law, distance to airports, road network access, and treatment technology. The chosen method of the multi-criteria decision aid is the MACBETH. It's a method that measures the attractiveness of the alternatives, and it can combine subjective and objective criteria. It's a relatively simple methodology and is gaining a lot of traction. It can be a good alternative to the most popular AHP methodology. The next phase of the process is the evaluation phase. We use geographical information systems to evaluate the locational criteria. We use the QuantumGIS software, which is really popular in the academic community, and we use the building tools from the software to measure the distance from each alternative to, for example, the permanent protection areas and airports. Next, in the evaluation phase, we defined an upper limit, which was an hypothetical alternative that satisfied each criterion in the most ideal way, and a lower limit that was, again, an hypothetical alternative, but that satisfied each criterion at the minimal legal requirements. All the alternatives, including the upper and lower limits, were compared two by two using the MACBETH software. To calculate the weights, we use hypothetical alternatives that corresponded to the best scenario in a single criterion, but the worst scenario in every other else. that meant that we could compare the preferability of each criterion. And a fifth alternative was made, a hypothetical alternative that corresponds to the worst scenario in every single criterion. After that, we have the weights. In this table, we can see the scores of each site in each criterion. As you can see, some scores are negative. That means that the particular site was below the lower limits in the given criterion. That's because if this landfill was built today, it would not meet the minimum legal requirements. In this table, we have the weights of the criterions. As you can see, disposal technology was considered the most preferable criterion, with distance to PPAs, distance to airports, and access to road network following. And that's the table with the final global score already using the weights generated from the previous steps. So this work showed that multi-criteria decision aids can be used as a tool to assess environmental performance of waste disposal facilities because it combines objective and subjective criteria into a coherent and logical indicator. And the results shows that there was a clear evolution in the Rio de Janeiro waste disposal management because the final scores corresponds to the chronological order of construction of the sites. And we expect that the use of multi-criterion decision aids at the planning stage of new disposal sites will mean that we can have more sustainable waste disposal methods in the future. Thank you so much for hearing this work.